I love our
David,
music.
I thought you were having a seizure there. I was concerned. Welcome, everyone. This is the August 15th installment of On.NET Live, where our mission is to empower you, the .NET community, to achieve more. I'm your host, Scott Addy, and with me today are co-hosts Myra Wenzel and David Pine.
Hello.
Super pumped to welcome today's guest, Chris Ayers. Chris, funny thing, we learned minutes ago that you're actually a Microsoft employee. But can you tell the audience a little bit more about your role here and who you are?
Sure. So I was a Microsoft partner for many, many years, and I started speaking and getting involved in the community when I was in that role. I joined Microsoft about 9 months ago, and I actually work for the Azure engineering part of Microsoft in the Fast Track program. So we're part of the customer experience program. So Fast Track is a way to de-risk and scale customers' implementations on the Azure. We give guidance and best practices. We act like your best friends who are cloud solution architects that'll point out all the ways to secure your deployments, make them more reliable and more scalable. And and I'm a huge DevOps fan.
Very cool. Now, when you say DevOps, what's your favorite DevOpsy type tool?
Well, I did TFS and Azure DevOps for many, many, many years. When I saw GitHub Actions in 2019 at Universe, I jumped in with both feet. So I've been doing a lot of stuff with GitHub Actions. I actually give a number of talks on it. And we recently did a Learn Live on GitHub Actions. So I'm a huge fan of that platform. It's so open, and there's so many ways to integrate with other services, and there's so much reusability, and it's just an amazing platform.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that, Chris. Now that we know who Chris is, my understanding is today we will be talking about .NET configuration. I also understand Mr. Pine here has a doc related to that topic. So with that, let's roll into the Related Bits segment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about configuration in .NET, and I'm going to kind of preface all of this with the fact that Chris is going to do a deep dive. He's going to cover a lot more, so I'm going to gloss over this article here, but you will find a link to this scrolling across the bottom of your screen very soon. So configuration in .NET is powered by configuration providers. So there's this premise of getting configuration from some sort of source, and that's provided through files on the file system, like JSON, INI, XML, or environment variables, or Azure Key Vault, or command line arguments, or third-party providers, all sorts of different ways to where you can have configuration. And one of the key abstractions is all of these different sources feed into the iConfiguration type. So you might be asking yourself, well, how do I get a hold of this iConfiguration type? So if you're using a simple console application, one of the most common ways is through the hosting package. So you would create a host, given your arguments, and then from that, you would be able to use dependency injection to resolve a configuration object. And that's kind of like the bare minimum. There's other ways to do this as well. You could use, instead of the hosting package, you can use the configuration package. There's various mechanisms for binding to the different types. And this article will teach you all about all of that. And again, this is just kind of the preface to how Chris is going to pitch and sell configuration to all of the potential buyers out here, right? So to speak, people who are interested. Maybe you're not familiar with configuration in .NET. Maybe you're used to some of the .NET framework ways of using configuration, but the .NET Core and now .NET 5 and 6 Plus are a lot more first-class citizens, speaking in terms of like using the options pattern and having strongly typed objects represent configuration and binding hierarchies. And it really goes a lot further So hopefully you'll check out this article, but more importantly, stick around for the hallway track, which we're going to jump into right now. Sweet. So I say all that just to kind of set the stage for you, Chris. Now the floor is yours to go in depth, and I know you have some slides. And
we'll skip over them real quick, but
sure.
Yeah, so .NET configuration in depth. I mean, there's some ways you can track me down on GitHub and Twitter and stuff, but I'm just going to fly through these so we can get to the demos and the real stuff. But when we talk about configuration, we're usually talking about settings, maybe some feature flags, maybe secrets. Though I usually try to talk about secrets completely separately because we want to handle those in a different way. We don't put secrets in our config files. We're going to use a key vault or something like that, most likely, or managed identities. So we don't even need passwords. So we're going to try to do that stuff separate another time. But, background colors, retry times, what percentage our flag is set. Those are configuration values that we usually do, maybe a path. And now there's a couple of ways we can deal with configuration. We can bake it in at compile time. And I know a lot of us have seen this pattern where we had branches for each environment and we had configs checked into our branches. I am not a fan. I don't like building things multiple times. It lowers your trust in what you're doing because branches can diverge and you're testing and running different bits. Like what you're building in dev and testing in QA and running in prod are different bits. And so there's low confidence in what we're doing. So I'm very big a fan of build once, deploy and run many times, where we apply our configuration at runtime, not build time. So, and the reason I bring that up is a lot of times in .NET, we were dealing with key value pairs, and we were doing these config files. Let me just break out of this. I'm gonna bring up Visual Studio for a sec. Anyone remember these web configs where we had our debug and release? Oh. Maybe we installed Slow Cheetah, and we had to go in and understand XDT transforms. Remember this? We're like doing this transform language.
Yeah, I remember that vividly.
Yeah,
and I do not.
We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. And when we wanted to access our configuration, what did we have to do? We had this configuration manager class. It was static, so it was hard to test and interact with. We everything was a string, so we had to do converts by hand, and it was easy. It was really hard to unit test. It was easy to like check in the wrong thing. Like we did stuff like this, where we would kind of wrap stuff and like return things or return parses. Remember that? I'm sure you did.
Oh yes, yes. I wanted a bool out of the configuration system. I first had to cast that or convert that from a string.
Yep. Oops. So how does it look like today in .NET? Well, you hinted at it. There's a whole new set of abstractions that are there. So we've got our iConfiguration sources. Like you said, they could be files like JSON. They could be environmental variables. They could be command line arguments. They could be a custom provider. We can make our own providers. Azure has done that with Azure App Config and Key Vault. They've made custom configuration providers so that we can reference those sources. When we have providers, they're defined in an order. And they're done from top to bottom, like first, second, third. And then the configuration builder takes all those providers, iterates through them, squishes it down, and then you get a configuration. And so that looks like something like this, where maybe our JSON file defines environment and database, but our environment variable defines a different database. And maybe we have a command line argument that defines a different key completely, a log level. Well, when the builder does stuff, it just kind of, it takes the last in wins, essentially. So localhost was defined in the JSON file, but it was overwritten in environment. So that's what we're going to get.
Why is that important though, Chris?
Well, this is where, instead of having to check in a file to change our config, we can take that same build, run it in a container, and just give it an environment variable. We can overwrite it with a command line argument. In Azure, if you're running in an app service and you go to the configuration page, those get injected into your app as environment variables. So they can override anything that exists in your config files.
So you're saying basically wherever our code is executing in that environment, for example, it would have what settings are pertinent to where it's running.
Exactly.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah. So another interesting thing about the new configuration system is we can have all sorts of nested stuff. Like we can have objects inside of objects. But when you get into the configuration system and you're trying to access stuff, everything's kind of flattened into like a key with like colons separating them instead of slashes. And so this is kind of consistent whether it's coming from a JSON file, an INI file, an XML file, or wherever. You're going to do like key, colon, key, colon, key to do nesting. And then, so does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Another cool thing we can do that we couldn't do in the old stuff is we can have an object. So we could make an object that we're going to define that has types that we can then say, hey, configuration, give me one of these objects for that section. Like bind these things together. And I'm going to show you some examples of this.
We do have a question real quick, Chris,
yeah.
if I might interject. So Fuel Snamble is asking, they've wondered, what would you do or how does it handle if like there's a key that actually contains a semicolon?
I would say that if you're having a key with a semicolon,
don't do that.
That's going to be an edge case, and probably don't do that. Like, sure, let's figure out how to break the system. Let's put special characters in our key value. Like, maybe don't.
Yeah.
Like that. That's an edge case.
There actually something I'll bring up here for our friend Fuel Snable while we're talking about this. There actually is guidance in the Azure portal. If you're using something like Key Vault as an example, it will tell you do not use the colon. The configuration provider will do a string replacement under the hood. It'll replace, I believe, double underscore with a single colon.
Yeah. That's a thing that happens that I was going to show in a little while for how you could do environment variables and stuff with that. But so if I do like out of the box, if I do .NET new console, guess what I get? Nothing. No configuration management like you implied. Now, if I do .NET new web app, I get some stuff. I get like JSON, like an app settings JSON, an app settings JSON with my environment name, secret providers, environment providers. So we got like lots of different type of provider there. So I want to get to the demos. So there's all sorts. Like I said, there's JSON XML, environment variable command line. There's key per file. Maybe you want to, maybe in a containerized environment, map some sort of config store to a file system. And mount it in your container. You could do that and point your app at that. Maybe you want to do testing and you want to do an in-memory configuration provider so you can dynamically change your configuration between tests.
So, and listening to you kind of pitch this, Chris, it's making me wonder, because I never have really thought about this. What can you not do? Like, what are the limitations? Like, I'm kind of curious now.
Well, there are some. There's definitely ones where you want to try not to repeat yourself on some stuff, but let's get to a couple of basic demos.
Sure.
Let's do that because I want to get into some code. So .NET new, what do I get? I get nothing. No configuration. This is what I have. So how do maybe I don't want to say hello to the world. Maybe I want to say hello to Twitter or the internet. How would I do that? Well, I could, in my project, I could add a package to configuration, and maybe I want to use a JSON file. So I could add a package extensions configuration.json. And I could say, I want to make a configuration builder, and I want it to look at a JSON file named config. Now build that configuration. .NET earn. That's not the right one. I even have it. I even have it on my shirt in case I forget. .NET run. That's
right. You're matching. You two are matching. So cute.
So this is saying
planned it. No.
Hello. So it's getting a configuration named greeting, and it's getting a configuration named environment. I've added JSON configuration to my console app with a couple of NuGet packages and a couple of lines of code. I can now have dynamic configuration that loads. And and I can come here and I can change this and say, I'm gonna do that. I can run it again, and now this should change. I haven't changed my build, but I'm changing my configuration. Awesome. Well, what if we want to go a step further? Maybe we want environment variables, right? There's a package for that. We can add that. What do I do to get environment variables? I add environment variables to my configuration builder. Like, it's super straightforward. And I'm flying through a couple of these just because um, these concepts build and they're very easy. So yeah, I'm in Bash. I'm actually running in a dev container. So I could say environment equals QA and edit a file. All I did was set an environment variable. I'm overriding things. What if I change this to prod, but I'm still running my environment? Well, last in wins. Remember? We're doing JSON first, then environment variables. So even though I made my config file say prod, environment variables wins because there's a clearly defined order in how they're being processed.
And that precedence is very, very important. And a lot of people aren't familiar with that. So it's a very good point to call attention to.
And that's why I'm starting with the console, because there's nothing and it's very easy to do this one. So, nope, almost got me again. What if we had command line? This is where we start doing interesting things. Well, see, look, we can do our command line. We can just pass in dash dash. Let me just make this a little bit higher. We can run in dash dash the config value name and then the value we want. We can also mix it with an environment because environments still work. We've got environments right there. They still work. We can do both and show last in wins. So we're giving an environment and we're giving a command line. And look, we haven't changed how we accessed our configuration at any point. We're not doing anything special or different between command line configuration, JSON configuration, and environment variable configuration. It's configuration. Doesn't matter. It's abstracted away. Which one was this one? So yeah, this is user secrets. So this is an amazing feature that was added that I don't think enough people know about. Oh, I had some extra references. This was a different demo at one point, but this is the important one. Configuration user secrets. A lot of times you were doing connection strings when we're running in QA or prod. We've got things that we don't want somewhere else. And so this is how the system kind of tracks things. When I add user secrets, I go .NET user secrets init. And what it'll do is if I don't have this user secret ID, it'll add one for me. And the reason we do that, so let me delete it and I'll show you. Save that. When we want to use user secrets, we don't want it stored in a file. Maybe we don't want it stored in an environment somewhere. Let me close this and reopen it so it refreshes. So it added in a new GUID. This is going to be stored in my like app settings, my app data local, like as part of my user profile. So it'll be stored somewhere on my local hard drive in a config file, a secrets file. But I can say something like .NET user secrets set. So I can set some sort of value that is going to persist in my user secret thing. And I can say, hey, I want to set the greeting to hey.
We do have another question here. So someone's Fuel Snabble is asking again, is there a use case for having the same user secret ID for multiple projects, or should it always be unique?
So you don't pick your user secret. Usually when you do an init, it gets initialized and it just gives you some persistence. I don't feel that sharing it across multiple projects is probably a good idea. I mean, if you really want to, you have control. If you know that you're going to use like multiple front ends or multiple middle services all pointing at the same database, and, or something like that, and you're just using it for testing, sure, you could point multiple services at the same ID, and it would work.
And
But
then
yeah.
I was going to say we have some other questions now related to this. We have an individual asking, what about using them on the production server? No.
User secrets are not for, this is only for a development thing. I will show you the documentation on that right now. So
if it's only for development environments,
yes,
the question might be, why would that XML node in the CS proj be source controlled?
That would be source controlled. So if I go to another, so if let's say you were doing stuff in .NET and you had checked in your project file and had a user secrets, and for you were running it and you didn't want to check in app settings.prod. You didn't want to have a script where you were setting environment variables every time they ran. You didn't want to do anything like that. And now I get it, and I come in here and I go, hey, I try running it and maybe it fails because it tries to connect to a database and there isn't one there. Maybe did I save it? Oh, I'm in the wrong project file. That's why I was doing it in a different project file. Trying to do a demo on the fly and
answer questions.
Yeah. So I pull it down. I just won't have any set for me. And so if I try running it and it fails because I don't have a connection string, I would then, it's my responsibility to go, hey, I need to go set my own user secret to my own local dev instance of whatever.
Right. So this user secrets ID node in the XML for the CS proj is really just an identifier that helps the system know this is a unique ID. And so it's not really, it's safe to be in source control, right? Is the answer. And
very much.
The individuals who are pulling that or cloning it locally and have it, when they run it, if something's not there, they would have to manually add it so that it's there.
Yeah. So because I initialized it, like it's just that. It's no big deal.
Right.
It's very easy and safe to check in, and there's no issues there. Now things get really interesting though as we start playing around with the command line a little bit more. We can, we talked about nesting. What if we want to nest our configuration? We don't just want to have a big flat thing of configuration. We want to have nesting structure. We want to define things.
Well, we got one more question just to clarify the previous comments here. So Michael saying it's safe, but wouldn't the CS proj constantly be updated by check-ins from different devs? No, the idea is whoever initializes it, it generates a new GUID, and that's the GUID that's going to sit there for the project. So the next dev to come along and pull it, right? It's not going to reinitialize it. The ID is already there. It's just that as you have it locally, you might not have those secrets. So then you would have to add already.
Has already been initialized.
Right.
If it already has the key, it won't add it again. It won't change the GUID. It's a one-time thing. It's just you won't have any secret store backing it that has values in there. So you would have to add your own values.
That's so you just have to initialize with that same GUID on your own machine.
Yep, and that's it.
The other thing I'll say here, so if you're looking at that value and you're saying, boy, that's ugly, I'd rather not use a GUID. You don't have to use one. It can be whatever value you want, so long as that's unique within that user profile folder location. The folder name has to be unique.
Yeah.
So and that goes back to Fuel Snamble's question earlier, really, when they were saying, hey, would it make sense to use like a shared user secret or like the same one for different projects? And the answer is no, you would want to avoid that. Otherwise, you start having conflicting projects, and sharing config.
Exactly.
You'll also notice if you were to create a new ASP.NET Core web app, by default, the innards of ASP.NET Core do not register the user secrets configuration provider when running outside of the development environment. It will specifically look for that ASP.NET Core environment value. And if it's anything other than development, that configuration provider will not be registered. So it's yet again another indication that they do not want you to do this in production.
Yeah, and I'm explicitly adding it here in a console app because it gives me a blank slate to work from. So, now kind of just moving on a little bit, we've got nested configuration. We've got a greeting that has two things, a message and a color, and we're just going to access that with that colon that we talked about. So things are getting flattened down. So we're going to run it with that thing, and you can, using command line, you can override that. So you can use the depending upon the OS. So some OSs might not want you to use the colon. That's where you can flatten it usually. I think on Windows you can flatten it with that. On Linux it still likes the colon. That's the kind of the caveat there. So it varies, but we can override individual things. We can access that nesting very easily with just that colon. And you can, on all these providers, you can say these things are optional if you want.
And this is where the order comes into play, right? Like you have the JSON, but if you pass through command line, then it overrides the JSON and that kind of thing.
Now, another thing I was just to keep going, a lot of times I see people doing all sorts of command line argument processing, and they're trying to do things to handle long dashes and short dashes and all sorts of different things to handle configuration. Well, there's a mapping capability for the command line args. So I can define a dictionary with a short, a friendly value, and then the more complex configuration object that we're defining
that it resolves to.
Yeah, I'm still using the bigger thing inside my code, but when I'm passing it on the command line, I don't have to do that.
You get to use the alias.
Yeah, so I can just say env equals QA, and I don't have to do -- environment. I can do color equals blue, and I don't have to worry about all of that nesting. Like built in. Don't need an extra library for it. I think that's cool.
It is, definitely.
So the next four demos I've got here, I want to show how you might evolve a configuration and start using bound objects. So we start introducing objects. Maybe we were going to make a tool that processes markdown files, and so we're writing out a whole bunch of flat things. I mean, that works. I mean, we can do that. It's just very repetitive. We start seeing some similarities in what we're doing. What if we started grouping things? Maybe we did them in a hierarchy. That now we can kind of be a little bit more explicit about what we're doing. We're intentionally saying, hey, I'm gonna do stuff for the PDFs, but we're starting to notice a pattern here. We're doing the same three things for each extension. What if we could do it as a method? Maybe we could process things in chunks, and we could start getting some reusability in how we process our code, right? That would be cool. We could have some nice organization. So we still got the exact same config file. We're still doing the same hierarchy of config, but now we can do this cool thing called get section. Okay. So the configuration object, we can tell it, I just want to get this one section and treat this as like my config. So I don't have to reference the hierarchy every time. I can just say in my code, I made a little funny method here. I can just say, I want to print out the file extension or the output directory. So now I don't have that hierarchy. I can kind of start abstracting away how my configuration is built. Now I'm still explicitly dealing with each thing, but I've abstracted it to a degree, right? Here's where it gets fun. Lots of funny characters, but should still be okay. Still prints out the exact same way. But now what we've got, if we look in this file, we're doing a bind. to this file options object. So what we can do is we can define a class that has explicit values, and we can now operate on our class, and we can say, I can do it a couple of ways. I can say, bind this, give me that section and bind this object to that section. And so it'll do all the mapping for me from the config file to the as long as the names are matching. So now if I wanted to operate on configuration in other classes, I don't have to take a dependency on iConfiguration, right? I can take a dependency on my file options. So I don't even need to depend on some of the core configuration stuff inside my code.
And when would you want to do that?
A lot of times you would want to kind of bind your specific configuration class to your config. So if as you're building your app, I'm going to be needing file extensions. I'm going to need, as you start building up your configuration, start with a class and then maybe define your configuration to match that class. I do this a lot. Like I know what my logic is, or as I'm building my logic, I start with the class and
One of the I think big advantages with that automatic binding is when you start getting into different types beyond strings, because when you work with just like the native iConfiguration object, everything that you're accessing is a string, right? So you can have bool or a time span or an IP address or a GUID or even nested objects. And then it will automatically, deserialize those from whatever format they're coming in, whether or not it's from environment variables or the JSON hierarchy here or XML or whatever the different source is.
Yeah.
You can go to these objects and it will bind it automatically.
So if I were to just quickly,
numeric types. Yep.
Forgive the quick and dirty. Just this should still work just fine. Going very quickly, live demo that, yeah.
Yeah, now you'll see that the retry of 3 flows through as well as the bool set to true, and that was coming from the config value. So it just flows.
Yeah. Just flows right through. That is not a string. That is not a string. That is not a string. So yeah, it picks it up and flows right through. So like that's just super awesome. So when we do Create Builder, so we did all that in Console Apps, just to kind of get to where we want to be in ASP. If I come into ASP and I do a run, a lot of times you're going to get a web application create builder. You're going to get a builder.build at some point. You might say if environment is development. It knows about these things. These things happen. Well, out of the box, this is what gets registered. We're getting some stuff registered out of the box. Providers, we've got some chain configuration, app settings, we got the environment variable. And the way I'm getting this is on a page. I injected the iConfiguration root, and I just got a list of the providers. So they're listed. You can see what providers have been initialized in your configuration. I'm just looping through them and printing them out, but this is all open information. So I can inject my config. I can get configuration from stuff if I want. There are a couple of ways we can inject configuration. So, I can inject the iConfig. And let me go back to my slides for just a minute to show you why, we've talked about all of these. And we kind of started talking about this. This is where configuration becomes really important, how we inject it. So yes, you can inject an iConfiguration root into your controllers. Now all your controllers depend on configuration extensions. There's some other things that go on. So out of the box, when with configuration, if you edit a file, it might not reload. Back in the .NET configuration framework days, you touched web config, a lot of times the whole app would just recycle. Like it would go down, it would reload. We don't have to do that anymore. But there are some limitations on how we inject things. Like we can get reloading of our config. Like we can get that. They give you some options, snapshot and options monitor that will let you inject and reload things. But out of the box, like we can use this iOptions thing, but it doesn't give us reloading. And the reason this matrix exists is depending upon your services and your pages, iOptions can get injected into a singleton, but snapshot can't. Monitor can get injected into other singletons, and it can reload. And then we also get this other cool thing called named options. So let me just show you that real quick, and this will start to make sense. If I just want to inject my config, I can just inject my iConfiguration. I can just inject that. I can get sections. I can do the get file options. I can do all of that. That can all be injected. I can also do, I want to inject this options class itself. So I made this markdown converter. This is the class. These two classes are the class that defines my configuration. So I've got a hard-coded options class that will be bound. And so in my settings here, if I say, hey, configure this class tied to that, that's how I enable that options injection. Anytime something asks for a iOptions of a markdown converter or whatever, the configuration system is handling that behind the scenes, that mapping. It does it for me through dependency injection. So I don't have to inject the whole configuration thing. I don't have to get the section. I don't have to do the binding. I don't have to do any of that. I can just say, I want one of these. And
we've got a question real quick here. So we have an individual asking, when is it better to use iOptions pattern versus binding?
So this essentially is binding, where we're taking the whole configuration thing and we're doing some binding ourselves. I think iOptions is typically better if you can, because you're letting the configuration and the dependency injection themselves handle all of that behind the scenes. Otherwise, you're going to be down here explicitly binding things and explicitly injecting things. And it just adds a layer that you don't really need.
Right. So the binding mechanics are really an implementation detail of how the options pattern happens.
Yes, exactly. And I do have, I do have a service here. I'm going to show you a little bit about some of the injection stuff. So, maybe we've got our iOptions monitor. Maybe we've got our iOptions snapshot, and then maybe we've got a service. And our service, if we go look at our service just real quick, our service, it's taking an iOptions monitor markdown thing. So then the reason I'm showing these off is you get some different behavior. So I can come in. Let me just come into my config real quick. I'm going to make a change. I'm going to say this is docx, not doc. I'm not going to restart the app. The app's still running. So I can come in and poke around. So if I do the injected config, this is now updated. So the injected config is getting me the latest thing. If I look at my iOptions, part of it didn't update. It's getting you're not getting all the live updates at the exact same time. But you can get some dynamic updates. But if I look at my and so this is a cool way where you can start having dynamic config come out of your stuff. But as you start changing your services, as you start changing how things are injected, you might start getting issues. So if I was using a transient, and if I go back to singleton and I want this to use, instead of an I options monitor, I want to use an I options snapshot, it would give me an error as I try to invoke it, just because some of these services don't work with singletons and don't like support reloading out of the box. Um, we got a couple more things to talk about, like Azure App Config, and also I haven't gotten to name things yet. So what if we're dealing with this and we have multiple file options, and we want to be able to dynamically loop over objects? Like, maybe we don't know how many of these things exist. Maybe we want to loop through them, or we want to inject them. Have you ever had dependency injection where you have 2 or 3 different choices for an implementation and you want to get one out of them? So that's where these named things come in. And not all of the injection patterns support name stuff, but this is where you can say, hey, I'm going to give you a file options, but it's going to be named PDF, and it's going to be tied to this section of the thing. So if you ask for the PDF one, you'll get that file option. But if you ask for the doc one, you'll get a different one. And the way that works is, so here I'm doing the config injection. Here I'm going to do some injection in Razor. So you can actually do the configuration injection right in Razor, because you can do that if you want. We can try doing it with I options, and notice it's just file options. There's going to be like multiple, and it doesn't work with naming. Like, you just get the first one every time you do an I options. But with the snapshot and the monitor, you can say, give me this specific one. Give me the PDF, give me the doc, give me the HTML one. And the same thing works with monitor. So, I need to stop it and start the next one. Yep. But named options is really cool, because that gives you a little bit more flexibility, and you can code things a little bit more dynamically and not hard code things the exact same way. So
and
tons of power there.
And that's another reason why you would consider using the options pattern instead of like manually binding.
Yeah, and manually hard coding stuff.
Right.
Yeah, those might not work, but here we can get the exact name ones we're looking for. When I asked for PDF and I asked for doc, they all came through. And yeah, doing injection in Razor works just the same as doing injection in a controller. So all that works. The same.
And I wanted to add this too real quick, because as I work on the .NET docs, I'm not focused on like the ASP.NET docs, and I know that you're kind of blurring the boundaries here a bit where you're talking about controllers and stuff, but I want it to be clear that this is not just applicable to web workloads. It can be literally anything. It could be workers, it could be Windows Forms applications, it could be Xamarin, Maui, console apps, any .NET workload you can imagine, IoT scenarios, whatever it is.
Which is why I started with console apps, just to show we pull in those couple of NuGet packages, and we can enable configuration in pretty much anything with just a couple of lines of code. So one of the cool things that I've started using quite a bit is Azure App Config. So Azure App Config, that's a great service out in .NET in the cloud. So this is a service that has feature management as well as configuration management. So I can have a GUI here, and I can edit and change my values on the fly and save it. And I would maybe want .NET to pull that dynamically. Well, one way I can do that, now this one is, we're still doing the ASP, we're still creating a builder, and after the builder is created, I'm going to pull my connection string out. Now this might be in my user secrets. This could be an environment variable, but we're going to configure app configuration, and we're going to access the builder, which we're going to be able to get. And then we're going to add in that connection string. And something else you can do is you can tell it to dynamically refresh, like go and check your settings and refresh your settings, every 5 minutes or 5 seconds or 30 seconds. And so you can have some dynamicism where it'll refresh those things. And just like before, once you've got it in there, it's all the normal stuff. Like if I want to access these settings, I might go into my controller. It's probably under my views. Yeah, it's under my views. And I can just access my configuration. So this is another way I can inject it if I want to and just pull those settings in. So we've got a lot of different varieties on how we can interact with this. I think I have my configuration set. If not, I might need to set my user secrets. We'll find out in a sec. Yeah, I don't have my connection string set. So look, I have no secrets yet. So I have all this stuff set up, so I blow it away and recreate it a lot. But what I might do is get my access key, copy my connection string, and I can come over here and go set my user secret connection string. Off camera, of course, for wonderful safety purposes. I was just making sure I had the right name.
We've got a question while you were doing that. Ryan's asking, does this work with Blazor as well?
Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Works with Blazor. And like you said, works with Xamarin, works with IoT, works with all sorts of stuff.
Every .NET workload imaginable.
Oh.
Yeah, someone was asking about WinForms as well.
Yeah, this works with WinForms. Okay,
yes.
I think I must have set it to the wrong connections value. Let's see here. Oh, okay. I didn't give it the full key name. That's why. Sorry about the little delay there.
No worries.
Live.
This is live, folks. Yeah.
There we go. That should be better now. I just put I just put app config, not connection strings app config. So see, we're getting this data from our app config now, and I can change that if I want to. So I can go down here to the configuration explorer. I can change my message. Say hello.
While you're doing that, we've got another question. Does it work with the service worker running as a Windows service? Yes. In fact, I've got docs on doing that as well. I can share.
Yeah, all that should happen. So, we so, there's lots of options. There's great docs on setting up app config. Another thing, and I'm not going to dive too much into it because I want to make sure we save time for questions and stuff. But yeah, key per file. This is where we can add a directory for key per file, and then have logging key file. We can have different values there if we want. We can do key vault. So key vault, you can add key vault in. Now this is a console app, and so I didn't have the builder build to get the name. But once you add in key vault, you can use managed identities. If you need to, you can use certificates or something else, but managed identities work just fine, especially for running in Azure. And in an ASP, instead of like hard coding things like I did kind of on the command line, we have more flexibility where we've got that builder. We can get configuration out of the builder a little easier. Maybe we want to have a different URL and use that managed identities when we're in production. And then, we can access our secrets just like we did any other config. We can do nesting. We can do all of that. We can get a section and then get secrets. So we have so much flexibility in how we access configuration and manage it.
We did have someone ask a question here. about whether or not they can use YAML. And I just wanted to say that there is not an explicit YAML provider. However, fun fact, all valid JSON is also valid YAML.
Yes. And there is also this little link right here. Would you like to implement your own JSON provider? Well, you can implement a custom configuration provider in .NET. They give an example using Entity Framework on how you like your models that you're doing, and how to build your own like configuration source and provider. Like they give you directions on how to do this stuff. So if you would like to build your own configuration provider that takes YAML, that'd be awesome. Like do that. That's cool. All of this is here in the configuration links that were shared before. More detailed guidance around the options pattern, and DI, the whole API on it. Some guidance, especially if you're a library author. So naming conventions. Yeah. Namespace guidance.
You're just pulling at my heartstrings here, Chris, because these articles are things I've written, so that I'm just excited to see them shared.
I wore my shirt today because I'm a fan. Okay, this is just a tribute.
Awesome.
We have an interesting question in the chat that
Yeah.
I think is worth addressing here. There's a lot of chatter about user secrets. It seems you've made a huge impact with that topic. So let's assume I'm a dev. I'm using user secrets on my local dev machine. And now when I deploy to production, I would like to migrate to using something like Key Vault in that particular environment.
Correct.
How would you recommend proceeding?
So I actually think there's some demos of that that happen. So like your config, you're just referencing values. So if they are coming from your user secrets, so in production, you've got an SQL password and an SQL user, and they're stored in Key Vault. You would not point at your production instance from your dev environment, but in your dev environment, you want your stuff to look the same. So you might have a local SQL server. You might have a local SQL admin and password. That would be in your user secrets. In your code, you would still reference the configuration values the same way. How you interacted it would be the same way. If I had a connection string, it would be the same way. So just because locally it's being served by user secrets and it has just some sort of identifier in the CS project, that user secrets file does not get checked in. It is stored somewhere else completely. But it's how your code is defined. In your code, how you access those connection strings, those API keys, those all happen behind the scenes. So whether it comes from Key Vault, whether it comes from user secrets, it's fine. I do believe like there's some sample apps out here around Key Vault. And if we come in here and look at some of them, if it's production, it's getting Key Vault. Well, what if it's not production? If it's production, it's getting Key Vault. What if it's not production? It just gets these values. So what if I were to say secret name in my config and user secrets? Let me just copy this file and let's see what we can do. Boom, boom, copy. Oops. We're just going to have some fun. I'm just going to make a folder and do this since we got a few minutes while we chat. Why not, Live dangerously. I like to live dangerously.
And in terms of I'm curious on your role or on your experience, from people migrating to framework to .NET Core, .NET 5 Plus, what are some of common mistakes that you see in terms of maybe keeping old configuration patterns or not doing something?
Oh, that's a great question. So what I see with a lot of people, to be honest, when we help them migrate, I used to do this as a partner. I do it now for Microsoft. But let's say, for instance, that someone has been in .NET forever, but they're currently on legacy apps in .NET Framework. they've probably had to add or roll their own dependency injection container. They probably had to add or roll their own configuration library, or they're just used to doing XML config transforms in web config. Or they're maybe putting it in a database somewhere. There's lots of options, but there's fundamentals that were developed in .NET Core that are now intricate parts of .NET 5 plus, 6, 7, on how configuration is handled, how logging is handled, all of how dependency injection is handled. So I would reassess the patterns and go look at the guidance that's out there. The documentation is phenomenal. So let me just run this before I set any secrets. So if I do a .NET run, I have no anything. Let's see what it's complaining about. Not be found. .NET. Oh, I know what I know. I didn't add the identity in the X509 and stuff like that.
I love that you're using the command line to, walk up to .NET CLI and say add packages. Where most mere mortals just use the, GUI.
He did say living dangerously. So.
Yeah, and I don't remember some of them. That's why I'm just coming up here, and I was gonna I wanted user secrets. That's what I wanted. Here we go. Oh, see what blows up now. Okay, so X509 stuff from a string. Configuration is not defined, so I did that one. I didn't do that one. I'm just doing this as we chat. I'm sure there's more questions coming in.
Yeah. We're just pressing buttons and hoping for the best.
It works for me a lot of times. Yeah. Oh, I said .NET New Console, didn't I? Yeah, I did.
So you have to change the SDK maybe at the top?
No, I think I got to add these.
Why don't you just grab all those package references and then just paste them into the other project?
Look at you being smart. Actually, let me do this one and see if there's more in here. Yeah, I'll just add these. Being smart. Why you gotta be so smart?
You can ask Myra and Scott. They would attest that I'm not.
Well,
I would never.
Does not exist in the current context. Why? I'm not even seeing that. So
go back to
web
the
application create builder.
Yeah.
I didn't grab the ASP stuff. There was some ASP.
There you go.
SDK
Yeah, the project SDK. Yep. Ta-da.
Yep.
Restore.
Who restores these days? Okay, value cannot be null. There we go. That's a little bit better. Programs 17. So it was trying to get this one from a environment is production. So I just need to set my environment to dev. All right. Actually, I'm just going to remove this block. I don't feel like doing that right now.
And then after this, we're going to have to call it. We're approaching the top of the hour. Running.
So if we run it, there's nothing there. So if you define a config and it can't find it, you pretty much just get empty string or null. But let's say instead we come here and we do .NET user secrets set. Secret name is Chris. We run it again. I did. I have an extra colon. I had an extra colon, didn't I? I had an extra colon. All right, I'll let you wrap it up then. Sorry.
All right. Thanks, Chris. So I'd like to thank all of our viewers for your loyalty and for tuning in to today's episode of On.NET Live. I've seen a lot of questions about this, so I'll call it out right now. We do record each and every one of these fantastic episodes, which you can find out at youtube.com/dotnet. Also, do check out our other live streams focused on .NET. Those can be found out at dot.net/live. Tune in next week. We'll have guest David McCarter joining the show to talk about code quality and performance as it relates to .NET. See everyone next week, and thanks again to our guest Chris for all the awesome information today.
Awesome. Bye, friends.
Thank you for letting me live dangerously at the end.
All right. Bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye, all. Thank you.